right, so today we're going to be talking about the evolution of the Hypercarry character in Honkai Star Rail. So we can see that I have traveled back to when the game was first released, and we had a lot of characters whom, let me see if I can actually adjust this by date. I can't, but anyways, we have a lot of characters who at the very beginning, you know, people had different team builds and all of that stuff. An example would be Clara. People had like a taunt counter Clara team, very nice. There was the very bare bones of DOT team. If I can find our boy Luca right here. And then people also had like a defense ignore Pela team with some other stuff. But the main point of this video, as I said, and the thumbnail, is we're going to be talking about the evolution of the Hypercarry. Now, when the game first came out, you know, a lot of people wanted to use these standard banner characters. However, there was one standard banner character who helped enable the Hypercarry of the time, that being Bronya, paired up with Zila, and this was the core of the game when it first came out. Time progresses, right? And then we got a new, you know, pseudo Hypercarry character in the form of Jing Yuan. And this was somewhat of the norm, right? And so we started getting into a little more specialized characters who did more and more and more damage. Looking at you, Dan Hong Imbibitor Lune, who was at the pinnacle of the game not very long, because the character who was coming out relatively soon after would be Jing Liu. And it's at this point that I think we started seeing little rumblings from players like, wow, the damage ceiling is getting, you know, crazy, right? Let me see if I can actually find the banner history, or patch history, I guess. So HSR patch history, and we can look at where exactly we have been, right? If I can open this in a new, here we go. So version 4 or version 1, right? Like I said, we had Zila, we had Jing Yuan, right? They were vying for 1 and 2 when it comes to top DPS characters, and that was the case. Blade entered into the frame, and he didn't necessarily overtake Jing Yuan. There was still a debate. Zila started to fall off a little bit, right? And then the very next patch, we got Imbibitor Lune, like I previously stated, who was the definitive best DPS character in the game. Then the very next patch, we got Jing Liu, and this was the crux of the DPS ceiling, right? It was these three characters in Jing Yuan. Zila kind of was falling off a little bit because of the fact that she was not AoE focused, and this was riding for quite some time until we started getting into like the upper echelon, where honestly a lot of people started having that question of this DPS like debate is just not a question anymore because of where we are like projected to go with these characters. And that started with, what was it, 2.1 with Acheron, and the damage numbers that she started to do, we just did not see in comparison to investment levels, right? Like in, you know, an E2 Acheron was doing stupid more damage like an E2 Imbibitor Lune and an E2 Jing Liu. This is where we started getting to the crazy point of what are they doing with DPS characters. And while Boot Hill was extremely powerful in his own right with Break, he did not eclipse Acheron until, boom, that you can say it again, we got to Firefly, who was the best DPS character in the game and was riding that wave, quite frankly, for quite some time. Fei Xiao had somewhat of an inkling to be able to get to that point, but you had to have a real team-centric team around her. And that's another thing that I want to add, because once we started getting into this current meta right here, when we got to Penacony and started, you know, getting more characters from these patches, as well as going back to the Jianzhou Lafu, is that it started shifting away more from the hypercarry character and more towards team-centric building, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but that allows the characters to do more damage. So we had a new damage ceiling right here with these couple patches. We had Acheron still, who was still really strong in her own right, but was a little bit below likes of Firefly and Rappa. Then we got to Amphorius, and the DPS ceiling just went like, you know what? I see you down there doing decent amounts of damage. You with your break Firefly teams, with your Rappa break teams, even with your Sunday hyper carry or hyper support Acherons, or you know, other DPS characters. Like, we see you. Here's Herta, and that went just like ballistic. It was just stupid at that point. And that ceiling, as everybody knows at this current point who has been in the game for quite some time, that was thrown out once we got to 3.2 with the introduction of the pure remembrance team. Now keep in mind, this was a team-centric build, right? For this team, you had the Hyacinth, Gastrus, Tribi, and quite frankly, whoever you wanted in that team. It typically was at the time the Remembrance Trailblazer, and that team was very good. Cypher came out, was not necessarily the pure DPS character, but it revived Acheron to some degree. And then we got to Phynon, who was like, hey, I'm here. Castrus, what's up? You want to dance? And competed with Castrus for the top DPS slot. Then we got the introduction of Saridra, who made him even stronger, and Hysolence, who brought back the dot meta, and honestly, because of Nova Flame buffs, was able to bring forth Kafka a little bit in terms of raw DPS numbers. And then you got the continuation of the Remembrance team completion at this point right here, and then we had Dahlia to revive a little bit of, where are you, of Firefly and Fire Deep or Break DPS characters, just Firefly essentially. And now at this current point, we are all the way up here, right? We are in Planet Arcadia, and obviously mechanics play a huge factor into a character's DPS ceiling, scaling, all of that stuff with Elation meta. But I do think that once we get to 4.2, we are going to be seeing another jump, because it is essentially going to be an anniversary patch, right? And the first pseudo anniversary, right? It wasn't like officially first year anniversary. I would say it's probably Don Hung and by Bitter Lune. When he came out, it was a big deal. A lot of people were hyped about him because of the character arc and all that stuff. And then the first anniversary, right, was actually Acheron, and that was huge. And then we had another pseudo anniversary at that point with Firefly. Then you jump, quite frankly, even further to Castrus, and it's just it's crazy, honestly, how much this is going. And I do think that Silver Wolf 9s will be doing a lot more damage, but I do think it is noteworthy to note where we have gone in this power scaling trajectory, and it is going up exponentially. Granted, you know, it's not really that surprising because of the fact that it is a gacha game. They need to make money, right? But it is interesting to see how fast it is growing.